I work at Femme Forward, which is a female-led music and entertainment company, and I run brand partnerships and strategic marketing for the team.
Yes, thank you so much, Ashley.
Hi, my name is Ashley Ocampo, better known as Outrageous. I am an artist and brand manager, and sometimes dabble in production. Yes, so
Mhm.
artist and brand management and partnerships as well.
Awesome. Alexia?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexia Smith. I work at Revolt TV on the integrated marketing and ad sales team. So we work with multiple brands and we create content, we do events, all to serve our audience and demo, which is young, urban, Black, and Brown folks.
Yes. And Brittany, last but not least.
Hey, my name's Brittany Lewis. I work on the artist relations team at YouTube Music, but widely I work on the team that's the central hub for all artist integrations into all of the Google brands.
Cool. So I'm going to throw some softball questions at you want to start out, because I want to start this conversation really on taking a journey into your careers and what brand identity means to you all, and what is the advice that we can share with our audience today. And Faith, starting with you, you are with Femme Forward, and I want you to sort of break down more your role with Femme Forward, and actually what Femme Forward is and why it was created. That was a lot in one sentence, but
Yes. So Femme Forward is it's such an incredible company. So it actually started as a concert series that my boss, the CEO Heather Lowry created under Live Nation Urban, and it was spotlighting different female creatives and giving them opportunity, especially across live music, because they're under represented and they weren't getting that many opportunities. So she really took it upon herself to you know take an actual step and say, I'm going to put more females on stage and give them that moment. And so from there, 6 months later, we had so many different shows going that Michael Rapino, the CEO of Live Nation, came to her and said, let's do a joint venture and actually be partners. And so from there, just earlier this year, it was established as its own company and joint venture. So now, while we started in hip hop and R&B, and that'll always be our foundation, we're now able to go across genres and give multiple different females an opportunity, both on stage and off. So it's really incredible also to be on a all-female team as well. It's an incredible opportunity. And I specifically work with brands, and when they want to work in music or with some of our different artists, I help run those partnerships, and we bring that to life through different music strategy and artist influence.
yes, thank you for sharing that. And I want to dive deeper into that in some of our future questions, because I think what happens, and I think a goal of a lot of smaller brands, is to sort of work with a larger brand like Live Nation. And what does that partnership actually look like? And how do you sort of remain independent while also joining a larger company? Ashley, it's interesting because with Ashley Outrageous, I know that brand is one, it's you, right? It's different from Faith, who is representing Femme Forward and Live Nation Urban, which is a larger company. But Ashley Outrageous is who you are as a person. So talk to us about the creation of that, and why you decided to put your brand on a platform like this.
Right. Well, so I actually got my start in the industry by being in the blog world, entering in 2008 and throughout that whole thing. And so my brand started as a blog, and I was very adamant on it being like being conscious of how do I separate myself from all these other blogs that are out there. So to put it in a nutshell, I was very particular with my content and made it like, what's going on this website is things that I like and what I'm into. And so people would come there to see like what I was into, versus you could go to some other website and see perhaps everything that dropped that day.
Yeah.
Now it then turned into, I like to say it was my foot into the door, because it then turned into me realizing my love for working with artists and brands, and all these relationships that I had developed in that time, I actually really nurtured them into my work now, which is, I would have never thought. Now I'm in artist and brand manage, which while it's me, I'm the brand, they're, it's like my company, even my company is Ashley Outrageous LLC, everything. But now I am more very keen on like being behind the scenes and pushing artists and brands into how to really get that authentic audience, like the way that I did, and partner them with the correct brand. So while it is my name, it's become larger than that now. Which is now there's people that I represent who are like, they're a representation of me now.
And that's amazing. I think that's a goal in which you've been able to accomplish, and also relationships that you've been able to nurture. Something that we're always conversing about is really that artist brand relationship, right? And anytime I'm asking about advice around it, how do artists select a brand, or what does that conversation look like, I'm sort of always turned in so many different directions. So I want to sort of set the record straight in this conversation today. And Brittany and Alexia, you specifically work with aligning artists to different, whether it be Alexia activations such as a Revolt Summit with different brands, and Brittany working with YouTube and Google, connecting them. So I'll ask this question to Alexia first, but Brittany, I'd love for you to chime in as well. What is that starter conversation when you're trying to match an artist with a brand?
First off, we have to know like what the brand is looking for, and what they represent, because we would hate to pair a brand with an artist and they don't align morally, they don't align aesthetically, or even just as far as what they represent in the artist's music. So a lot of the times, I kind of start that research early. I'm always on the lookout for new artists who have something to say, or a different vocal disposition, or they're just creative and kind of independent, because it's a lot easier to work with those artists, those new and upcoming ones, when they're kind of identifying what they want to be and how they want to be represented, versus an already established artist who may be boxed into certain constraints. They may already have a certain deal, so they can't touch another brand or in that space. But that's kind of one of the fun things I love to do, like that discovery part where we bring an artist to a brand, or present an artist to a brand that they may not have had on their radar. But we can share just some of the points where they align and possibly build a relationship between that artist and that brand. Especially if they're a new artist and they don't have any brand partnership experience. That's something that we love to be a part of firsthand for those artists.
Brittany, do you have anything to add on to that question?
Yeah, it's kind of the same way, right? In-house at YouTube and Google. So there's so many different brands that serve different audiences. So whether your Google for Startups is looking for an artist to maybe participate in one of their activations, the first thing I'm going to think about is like, okay, which artist is really at the forefront in technology? Who do I always notice that are on the new apps, or are into venture capitalism? Like, those are the kind of things that I'm thinking about across the board, whether that's, Google for Startups or YouTube main, or whether that's a YouTube music activation, or even like a Google Nest, like home sessions, right? It's like, who do middle American people maybe want to listen to that's already embedded into Google Home, right? So just kind of identifying what the brand wants.
Yeah.
And then also too, like there's a lot of times where like the brands just go for the same artists over and over again because it's safe. So also like part of my job and my duty is to kind of also nudge them to think a little bit outside the box. And I'm like, hey, I know you might want like Alicia Keys, but like, I don't know, how about a Baby Rose, right? Like, and so that's kind of how I push, the brands just to think about stuff a little differently. I'll give them like a list, and that's kind of like what I'm known for, is just kind of counteracting them, because they have a set, list of some of the top tier big artists. And I think those people are necessary sometimes, but also thinking about how brands could take more risks. And I feel like that's a little bit of my duty too.
What can you share more about sort of what are the pros in a brand taking a risk on maybe a smaller artist, not an Alicia Keys?
Well, one, too, it's just like it's like who your audience is, right? So if you want to be at the forefront of innovation and technology, you should probably, the artists that you want to align with your brand should also be that way, right? And I think it's easier to go with an artist that's more established, right? Because you know exactly what you're going to get. But I think really what brands, especially across Google, what they normally do is just lean on us to kind of like push them into the right direction where something feels good and represents their brand great. And they're like, oh, wow, I like had no idea, right? They're not music people, right? A lot of them are tech people or on the advertising side. So they just go basically with the artists that they see on their TV screens every day. So for us, I kind of just, because I'm immersed in music and in the culture,
Yes.
you know, my senses go off crazy when I'm like, oh, well, you guys should get so-and-so, he did an amazing set. And then they're all like really into it after the fact.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool. There is this, I like that sort of everyone is really talking about audiences, right? Because that's a huge part of building a brand, sustaining a brand. Like, there's no point in building it if no one's listening or watching it, right? Unless it's a personal passion project that only you want to look at. But the audiences are important. I know specifically with everyone on this call, but Faith, I want to target this question towards you, is working for Femme for a platform that encourages and puts women on these different platforms to the forefront of everything. That's important to not only the industry as a whole, but to you as a person. So talk to me how aligned your sort of personal goals are with the Femme for brand.
Yeah, that's what I love most about being a part of the team, is that I've always loved working in the music industry, and music's always been a big passion, but to have something that also has purpose behind that is truly incredible. So not only is it amazing that we're throwing these different concerts, and that is fun in itself, but the fact that at the end of the day, I know that my hard work is, pushing female empowerment and opportunity. It's incredible. So as a young person getting into the industry, if you're able to identify that your values line up with the company that you work for, it makes for an incredible experience in the workforce.
100%. And Ashley, as you defined your audience, and you've been in this game, because Ashley Outrageous, I think you created in 2008, if I'm correct, and that's been, what's that, 12 years? My math is on point today. But how has who was your original audience, and then has that shift over the years?
My original audience is definitely like music lovers. I think I've still kept the same audience. It's like we've obviously, a lot of us have grown up now.
Yeah.
So my audience now is definitely like, even just everybody that I had, back in that time that I had relationships with. We've all like, been networking, like even like horizontally, and have all come up together. So I feel it's the same audience, as we're all still following, this same story. But now I'm also getting, upon me getting into management 3 years ago, now I'm getting a younger demographic for, even especially when it comes to like the visual artists that I represent. I'm getting more artists, like visual artist followers like that, as they want to know more about our relationship, and that in that way, and managing, as we've done so many brand partnerships that have come from really like developed relationships that we've worked on, and we're very keen on, we only work with brands that align with us. Like that goes back to like what Faith said, like everything that we've done as far as brand partnerships, we've probably said no more than yes, because we always want to be true and authentic to our brand. Like, and as I'm sure as other artists know, and other managers, like there's, when you have like somebody that's like booming, like opportunities are coming across the table all the time. So we've been able to keep the same audience by remaining authentic to ourselves and our story, and continuing to tell the narrative. And that's how like I've still stayed the same since I started that blog that doesn't even exist anymore, and people still ask to be posted on it, and I'm like, it doesn't exist. It's gone.
I wanted to add on to that, DeMarco, in regards to audience. I think that Ashley, you mentioned authenticity, and I want to keep it very, very real from the network perspective. It is so important to, it's not always a fun song and dance when you're trying to lock in a brand and align them with, with who you represent as a network. And for example, with Revolt, we are, hip hop, strictly hip hop. We experiment and tap into other subcultures and sub genres of music, but we're unapologetically hip hop and we're unapologetically Black. Yeah. We're inclusive. And so understandably, a lot of brands, it's very risky and not worth the risk sometimes. And sometimes they'll even dangle that nice dollar in front of us to try to get us to sway on where we stand. And I'll keep it extra funky. Like, we're not always able to stand ground all the time, be it for politics within the company, internal and all that. But we are very, 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 very passionate about speaking to our audience and knowing our audience, how they like to discover content and music, how they like to be served. And more importantly, we know that changes. Yeah. And the hard part, sometimes the challenging part, is really voicing that and letting brands understand and know that the first time versus them turning us down and then coming back because they see the culture shifting. Yes. That's something that takes a lot of tact, and that's something I'm even learning as I'm moving forward within marketing and learning audiences and seeing how content performs, seeing how independent artists engage and build up a strong fan base just solely by being themselves, and how we can mirror that within the network as well. But I wanted to piggyback on what Ashley said, because the authenticity part of it is truly, truly important, because if you're doing brand partnerships and the output doesn't resonate with the audience, it's like, what's the point? Like, what's the point,
Yeah.
They know when you just took the check.
Yeah.
Yeah, the audience will call you out. They'll be like, especially when like the fan base is that engaged, I feel, and they maybe remember something you said a couple months back. They're like, what? And you'll get those people that will be in your comments and call you out, and then you're like,
so it's better to just stay true from the beginning. Don't act like your audience doesn't have the wherewithal or the knowledge to know like that something isn't being served to them and it's not authentic. Like, they know, regardless of age, Gen Z, millennials or not, like, they know,
Listen, first of all, Alexia, I have to say that was my next note in terms to bring up, to piggyback off of Ashley. So either you're in my notes or just because we're both from Chicago that we're connected, but I'm loving it. It is making my job easier. So keep it coming. But I want to continue talking about authenticity, specifically around Revolt too, because you do serve, your priority is Black and brown audiences. And this is a question I want to ask everyone is, right now, what we're seeing in the industry specifically is ever since specifically the murder of George Floyd happened and the show must be paused, like there's a huge focus on diversity and inclusion within, I want to say within everywhere, but specifically within the industry, right? So when it comes, a lot of brands are now saying, we want to serve that demographic. We've been missing it all along. And I'm always curious of how authentic is that connection. And so, Brittany, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. And then Faith, if you want to chime in too, I'm curious to know, how do you sort of suss out that authenticity with the brands?
So I think this kind of works in two different ways, just coming from the YouTube side. So something that we've just been working on in general is working with advertisers and different brands on packaging what they would consider risky or explicit content. So that usually affects hip hop and R&B artists, like blatantly use Black artists in general, and making sure that we're allowing them to like run their brands against content that they would normally deem as risky. But like the way we kind of feel about it, it's like, people who listen to hip hop wash their clothes. Like, I use Tide, I brush my teeth, I use Colgate, right? So it's like this whole notion that like brands don't want to run their ads on what they deem as risky content, because they don't understand that like the consumer, when watching this stuff, knows how to differentiate and separate certain things, right? So they know that like just because your ad is running on let's say a Jay-Z video, like that doesn't necessarily mean that Jay-Z has co-signed this or that you're co-signing Jay-Z. You're just trying to get in front of his audience, right? And so like we work really hard with getting brands to kind of get those walls down so that like Black artists can get like the same amount of equity as maybe their white counterparts. And then on the other side, from like the YouTube side, like the music team's always done like a really good job of being diverse and inclusive, right? I just think because the music industry is just more accepting in a lot of ways. But I think what we've really been working on, just like across the board, we have like a Black Voices Fund, and YouTube pledged $100 million to go to Black artists and Black creators across our platform. And we've just been working on programs to help them build equity and have access to information, because I think those are two really big things that like, you know, a lot of artists and creatives in general, a lot of the times they're just looking for the information, they're looking for the access, and a lot, you know, and so they can start asking the right questions. And then also building that equity and getting equity. Yes. So
there. Faith, have you seen any shifts in your audiences as this lens of diversity and inclusion has sort of widened on the music industry?
Yeah, I think what's truly incredible, back to being authentic, is before this erupted, Femme Forward and Heather as a whole was always pushing and diversity. And so when that's already something that's part of the core mission of the company, these types of unfortunate things happen, we're already kind of prepared for it. So anytime we're making a decision, whether it's working with a brand or even down to, you know, who are we going to collaborate with on the back end, it's Femme Forward's thought is always, who else can we give the opportunity to? Is it a female videographer? Is it a creative on the back end? It's always in our thoughts. So that is always happening as well. So it's been incredible to already have that organically kind of take shape. And now brands can see that they can come to an authentic company that is always had that in mind.
Yeah. Faith, I'm curious to know, and I want to pivot the conversation in this direction, is how are you as Femme Forward measuring success? What goals and metrics do you have in place to say we're on the right track and we're doing this well?
Again, it goes back to how great our mission is, and it's about celebrating, empowering, and educating females.
Yeah.
So if our programs are doing one of those things, or that's always, it's our focal point, it's a success to us. If we're giving someone an opportunity, especially a female, something, whether that again is, you know, an internship or mentorship, or it is an artist and it's a brand partnership, as long as we're doing that, that's how we're measuring success.
And Ashley, you mentioned earlier sort of how Ashley Outrageous has shifted over the years, but share with our audience sort of when you first started Ashley Outrageous, what sort of success looked like for you then, and what does it look like for you now?
Oh man, it's the polar opposites now. Back then it was, you know, back in what feels like eons ago, it was like if I could get an interview with an artist, or, you know, and like a first interview or like an exclusive record or something first on my website. And now it's not even about me more so like anymore. It's about whose journey I'm now a part of. You know, now it's like I never thought I would get into artist and brand management. Like back then you couldn't tell me I would be here, but where I'm now and the difference, like what I'm seeing success is like the artists that I manage or the brands, and being able to make partnerships happen for them, like being able to make things happen. Like I like to say, like I'm like a finisher. Like you tell me what do you want to do, I do it. You know, one was like, hey, I'm more than a designer. And I was like, say less. How can we bring her, you know, to be more than a graphic designer? And now, like, she's looked at as an artist and is getting the respect that she deserves. The other one is a musician. And while we're getting ready to put out music top of next year, you know, she's a younger woman. She'll be 21 next month. But even building with her, you know, she was still in high school when I met her, and I was very keen on telling her how important artist development is, and how I didn't want to be a manager that I just find her and then 6 months later we put out a song. Like, I don't care about that. Like, I want her to really know herself and record songs and record and just know what she likes, and not make music as to, just what's out there right now. Like, really make music that she likes. So yeah, like my successes now are completely different. I will say, from back then, and really now, like, yeah, it's my success is like making who I represent happy and making things happen for them, really, more so right now, more than ever.
Cool. Thank you. And Alexia and Brittany, with you all working sort of directly with the artists and brands in that way, has there ever been a time where sort of the brand and the artist have not aligned, and then what does that conversation look like?
Every day.
My face was like, oh yes, well, yeah. Did you go first, Brittany?
All the time. But I think the big part of my job, and probably Alexia's job, is like identifying artists who whose brands will like align with your mission and your goals, right? Because sometimes, these brands have their own goals, and artists can kind of tell that, and they're like, this has nothing to do with me. Like, and I'm not here for it. And so I try to mitigate some of that tension with just making sure that the artists that we do select and that we're working with, like, that it really honestly just comes down to that it makes sense and it's authentic and it's supposed to happen, right? And I think sometimes, people in the company can have their hearts and minds set on a specific artist, and sometimes I'll be like, okay, and I just know it won't go that way, but I'll just let it kind of go down that path. Yeah. Just for them to be like, no, we're gonna pass. And I'm like, see, told you. So let me give you this artist. And I think those are the big things. But like for us, like our biggest goals are making sure that we are economically empowering Black artists on our platform and making sure that they receive the equity that they deserve, making sure that they're growing their audience and their subscribership and their growth on their YouTube channels across the board, because that leads to more money, and monetization is everything. And then also too, it just leans into the fact that you have a baked-in audience that will always be there for you, right? And so we really just kind of run alongside artists from the ground up, and just really, let them know that we're here for them. And, sometimes when we clash, it's all good. It's like, we get it. You don't like it. We knew you didn't like it, but we have to ask. So.
Yeah. I want to speak to two things. The first thing is I was laughing because you have instances or you have moments and partnerships with brands and you're like, okay, you had a fire to put out and you want to make sure you never have to deal with that fire ever again with any brand, right? And so there are some times where we have to ask hard questions internally to say, hey, like by presenting this artist to this brand, is that going to put us in a position that either A, we can't, fulfill what we're supposed to fulfill, or is it budget wise, does it fit in? So you kind of learn, I think, after one or two, mishaps, to kind of add some questions in there just to be triple sure, or make sure you're doing your research on the, like, what's happening currently with that particular artist, because a lot of artists get caught up in some stuff that make it difficult, and we have to circle back on the talent thing. So you do that ahead of time. You try to you make sure you present what the brand represents to the artist and their team, so they know exactly what they're getting into. And you say, hey, ask them questions like, is there anything you don't align with? Is there anything you don't want to talk about? Let's just put it out on the table that right there before we even get to set, before we get to a shoot, before we even talk about content. Yeah. So that's something that's really imperative to learn as wherever you're at, whether you're at YouTube, Google, learning that dance, learning when to chime in, learning when to say, and kind of let them go with it. Like Brittany said, learning when to, speak on certain things or counter, that's really important. And then the second thing I wanted to say is too, one of the reasons why I loved Revolt when I first got there was because we support up and coming artists like honestly, I don't think any other network does. Like before COVID, we would let artists come in and just perform for us in the conference room. Like if they had a new EP or LP, or they, you know, felt like just talking to people or sharing their story, or they're doing an artist revamp. So many times, you know, we just have an email and we're like, so-and-so's coming to the office. And Lucky Day is a great example. Like Lucky Day, before he blew up, before the Insecure soundtrack, you know, he was able to come into the office. He shared visuals and songs. So that way all the departments are like, man, okay, we'll keep him in mind in case we have any partnerships, or in case we have like some social content we want to shoot. Let's just ask their managers if they're available for some camera time. And that's a great option to have for artist development, you know, that you don't really get at another music network. You know, you can come and bring your artists in and let them practice their speaking about themselves and their sound and their craft and their passion, all while educating us, you know, and we're keeping them at the top of our minds in case there's any opportunities for something organic and just that fits. So
I want to go ahead, Brittany.
Oh no, I was just going to plus one what Alexia said. I think that really goes a long way too, especially when you're in a really large company and there's so many stakeholders that are involved. So like Lior, for instance, had an offsite with a bunch of Google leads, and he was like, "We're gonna be in Atlanta. I need you to bring me the best like up and coming Atlanta singers." And I'm like, okay. So I put together a showcase for them, and so now, across the board, all those leads to this day are still asking like, oh, what was the singer's name that sang at the dinner? Can we get her for our holiday party? Or can we get so-and-so to pilot this new product? And, you know, so like those kind of things are really valuable. And then also you're just, again, helping artists get money in their pockets where it makes sense and where it feels good.
Yeah. It's something that's sort of been making its way into today's conversation. Hopefully I'm not the only one who has received this. But something that's been on my mind lately too is that cancel culture, right? And it's been specific to brands. You all are nodding, this is great, it's gonna go well. So Faith, I wanna ask you sort of just generally, what are your thoughts on cancel culture? And is it something that we should continue to implement, or should we put a rule book to it?
That's a tough question. I think you just have to remember it's 2020, and you know the internet is the internet, and I think it's more just about being responsible.
Yeah.
You know, anything that comes out of your mouth, or you know, the actions are all going to have consequences. And so, you know, sometimes rightfully so, if you are a public figure or you're a part of a major company, again, your value system now is at the forefront. Mm-hmm. So I think it's just about self-awareness. And again, I think when you work for a company, you have to remember that you're also representing them. Yeah. So you definitely be very careful with again, your actions and your communication.
Yeah. Once an art, say specifically an artist has been canceled from a brand, and we've done all this planning and spent all this money, right? And we've got all this stuff coming up for the year. What happens to everything that we have planned? Do we put another artist in that place, or do we just sort of cut our losses?
Shift. You shift quickly, you pivot. And two, I think it just depends on what the offense is, right? I think there's levels to it, right? And so there's people who get canceled online for maybe an unpopular opinion, and then there's people who get canceled because they've committed an egregious act or crime, right? So I think there's levels to that. And then also too, it's like, read the room. If you know an artist is not popular at the moment and people aren't feeling them, whether it's their message, especially if we're just talking about messaging and like opinions and things that are like, you're looking kind of funny in the light, then you have to be like, okay, hey, you guys, this artist right now is not looking too favorable in public opinion. Yeah. Maybe we should pivot to somebody else. Now, if it's somebody who's committed like domestic violence or some other crime, it's like, that's a non-starter.
Yeah.
It's like that's dead. That's DOA. It's dead on arrival. We just have to pivot and find another artist. Mm-hmm. And then two, I think something that we often think about too is, when are you allowed to work with artists who have in the past been canceled, or who've made mistakes or committed bad acts, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what we really look for is if they've been able to rehabilitate, if they have atoned for their grievances, and how they are now messaging themselves and what other work they're constantly doing, to kind of get out and kind of atone for some of those past indiscretions. And then that's kind of how we decide on if we're going to work with somebody who has a past or a history that's might be unfavorable. But most of the time, you know, big brands like to kind of stay away from that stuff. But there are a few people that have been able to come back and reinvent themselves, and you know, are able to get back on platforms and be alongside different brands.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to tap into those artists who, like, I just use Lance Armstrong as an example because he, you know, he kind of turned around and everyone hated him for at a moment. But when he recognized and started to atone for his behavior, that right there is really valuable. And that's really, that's real life. Like, a lot of people make crazy mistakes, especially in the public eye. So if you have an artist or a talent who's willing to speak on that, or not hide from it, and speak to how that person is making it better, I think that's great. And then also, we're talking about, you know, talent, canceling talent. There's brands that have gotten canceled too. And I personally feel like I'm not really with the whole cancel thing as far as for brands, because it's like, how are they going to learn? Like, let's put them in like a timeout versus like a cancel. Like, you guys have homework to do, and until you finish that homework, then you can come back on the playing field. But as far because we want to know that they've learned from their mistakes, we want to know that they're changed, whether it's a Uber, a H&M, a Pepsi. Like, I personally, I want to see how you guys make it right. So I personally don't really agree with the whole cancel thing for brands. And even for people, I think everyone changes, everyone makes mistakes. The level of their mistake is, you know, depends on your perspective. But if that person, talent, or brand is willing to show some type of rectification, and they're willing to, like, hey, like, I messed up, but this is what I'm doing to moving forward. And, you know, I think it's worth entertaining. I think it's worth pitching and presenting to the brand or an individual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think overall too, just for society, I think it's just a little dangerous to quote unquote cancel people, right? And so I think to see the humanity, not only just in artists, but the people behind the brands that are making these mistakes are important. And obviously people need to be held accountable. Like, accountability and taking responsibility for indiscretions is super important. But I don't think, you know, cancel culture serves anybody benefit.
Yeah. And I also think that I mean, with cancel culture, it's interesting, right? Because there needs to be some sort of barrier that holds these brands and these artists accountable. And the only thing that makes sense is sort of the audience that's consuming the content, right? So if it isn't sort of canceling or putting someone in a timeout, what is it? To your point, Alexia, how do they learn their lesson? So thank you all for chiming in on that. I want to switch the focus to sort of you all as individuals. Something that I love to talk about in these sessions is really how you all got to where you are now. And it's always very intriguing, specifically for our audience and just us as an organization. Our goal really is to educate our young people on the different opportunities within the music industry by also showing them the pathways that you all took to get to where you are now. And so, Ashley, I want to start with you, and I'm going to ask this question of everyone is, if you could tell me 1 to 2 skills that make you successful in your job, what would they be?
I think number one, my go-to is the power in networking. I've always been the type of person I treat everybody the same. If I go into a room, you know, treat everybody the same, because you don't know who's who, and not being afraid to say hello to people. You know, I've a lot of my successes in my relationships is because I went up to people, or maybe somebody came up to me, and it's all been relationship based and having a strong network. And two, people always laugh at this, but it's something I'm like, I'm so crazy about it, is being professional on email.
Yeah.
I can go off on a tangent about it, about how there's just people who are like not professional on email, and the people who are, and in this industry that we work in, we're a lot of us who are on email all day long. There is like an email etiquette, like there's times where people, have emailed me, there's no subject, and then they're like, hey, I want to work with you. No, nothing. No, nothing. No, like, what do you want to work on? Didn't even put a subject, like, didn't even sign it. But so I've always been told I have I'm very professional in my email. Not to say that I sound like a robot in my emails. I don't, I always keep it like lighthearted, but if it is somebody that I don't know, I want to be respectful and write them a correct like email. But then once it gets to that point, that like we have a rapport, then it's easy for me. But those are two big things, like just being professional and like I said, a network and treating everybody the same. That's a big thing for me.
It's so funny that you bring up email, because I actually been having conversations about, I'm very professional in emails, but I'm not in person at all. And so they're like, who is this? And I'm like, I've always been taught to be like, subject, how are you? I hope you are well. Blah, 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 blah.
Right.
It's interesting that you bring that up.
Literally, I'm just following up every day.
Yeah. Just checking on the below. Faith, how about you? 1 to 2 skills that have allowed you to be successful in your role.
I think definitely in the music space, there's a lot of different personalities. So I think if you can adapt, your adaptability, and just know that you're talking, when you're communicating to someone, they may want to be communicated a certain way. So as long as you're able to kind of adapt with who's ever around you, and know that there's different communication skills, I think that's really helpful. And then problem solving skills. Thinking outside of the box, not being one track minded, where yes, you may have a certain skill set, but Google's a thing. If you don't necessarily know how to do it right off the bat, try to always be problem solving for somebody else around you. I think that's a really big one, especially in a space where we're cross content and we're at live events. It's ever evolving. So you want to definitely be well-rounded in.
Faith, did you always know that this was a career that you wanted to go into?
I knew I always wanted to work in music.
Okay.
I was open to knowing that there's so many different, departments.
Yeah.
I was just open-minded to wanting to get in a label at some point, and from there kind of learning as much as I could, and knowing that there's so much to be learned
How did you discover that brand partnerships was a role within the music industry?
I weirdly fell into it. I wanted to work at Universal Music Group right out of college, so I just kept applying for administrative assistant roles. And on the 10th try, I guess they were kind of finally like, let's just give her a shot.
Yeah.
I was an admin assistant for their central brand partnership team. Realized, my communication background, it was kind of a perfect fit. And so I, lucky enough, fell into it.
Yes, congrats to you. 10 sounds low. 10 sounds like a good, I could say I've been declined more than 10 times from a place. So kudos to you. Alexia, how about yourself? 1 to 2 skills that have allowed you to be successful at your job.
I would definitely say multitasking is one of them. Regardless of the hat you wear, regardless of the title you have, honestly, especially in brand partnerships, just be nimble and be willing to grab a hat and put it on, especially if you see there's something that needs to be done. To Faith's point, I started off in ad agencies, freelancing, doing copywriting, community management for social media, a bunch of different TV shows. Honestly, to the people listening, the young people listening, a lot of the gigs I had before Revolt, I'm freelancing, I'm contracting, there is no benefits, you're rubbing elbows with other people who are doing the same thing, whether it's graphic design or copywriting, paid media, sales, and the advertising side. It's just best to learn as much as you can and find your sweet spot. I think it's better to be able to do a lot of things pretty well and good versus one thing really, really perfect. So multitasking is one of them. I definitely say communication skills, like putting yourself out there, to Ashley's point, like not being afraid to speak to people and walk up to people, because regardless of what you want to talk to them about, they're going to remember you approaching them, and that determines whether maybe they want to continue the relationship or provide information or vice versa. So putting yourself out there. And then the third I would probably say is organizing your thoughts. Like sometimes for me personally, I have so much going on. I get so excited, especially if we have an opportunity to pitch to a brand that I really like. And there's just things all over the place. Allocate time for yourself to order your thoughts and order what you want to say creatively. That way it's not missed in the delivery and you don't miss out on that opportunity, which I have experienced. I get so excited and, I'm spitfiring things and I haven't had the time to just sit and order my ideas or order the creative. So it's best to to allocate time for yourself so that you can think your process through and figure out how you want to communicate your ideas to your team.
100%. Brittany, how about you? 1 or 2 skills to make you successful.
Okay, so I think the first one that comes to mind for me is being audacious and just having that like tenacity to take risks. I moved to New York with absolutely no job. It was a risk that I was willing to take, and it paid off great. And just also, you can even take those skills to your job every day, right? It's like there's sometimes people get caught up in the status quo of doing the job the same way year after year, quarter after quarter. And it's like, hey, you guys, like this is cute and all, but we have to switch it up. Like, and I think being audacious leads to innovation. It leads to real big like brand shifts. So I think that's an important skill. And also too, like, can we just talk about good old fashioned like hard work?
Yeah.
Actually doing work. Okay. Because I think a lot of people are really into the idea of certain jobs. And then they get there and they're like, this is not what I really wanted to do. Yeah. And it's like, okay, you don't want to do that. Well, then you need to figure that out. And then you also need to put in the hard work to get to where you need to be. And kind of what Alexia said about being able to kind of look at various different parts of the business and kind of figuring out what you want to do. I think also too, like people don't ask enough questions. Ask questions, bruh. Some of the smartest people I know, CEOs, like venture capitalists, like brilliant minds are not afraid to ask questions. Sometimes you're like kind of shocked. You're like, wow, you don't like you're asking a question, like you don't have this answer already. Yeah. And I think it's good because you can't always assume that people know that you don't understand, or you can't also assume like, okay, I don't understand this and maybe I should try to Google, but I don't know, like sometimes it's just good to raise your hand and ask a question. And I think some of the best leaders ask questions. Yes. And I think it's super important. So don't ever be afraid to ask a question, even if you think it's stupid. And I might sound like a kindergarten teacher, but there's no stupid questions.
Thank you for sharing that. Say it again, Alexia.
That's right. There's never any stupid questions. You better risk asking that stupid question versus you making a crazy mistake and it like all you had to do was just ask the question. So I agree with Brittany 100%.
We have a question from the audience. I'll ask it to Ashley and Faith. What keeps you all grounded and while you're doing all this hard work? Ashley, we'll start with you.
Oh man, what keeps me grounded? I feel like I'm majority for the most time grounded. I would have to say it's my surroundings. It's who I choose to like let in my circle day to day, like my tribe, which I feel is like very like sacred, like who's in close proximity to me, because we're all, have something going on and always like have each other's backs and like cheering each other on. And even on days, because not every day is a great day. Some days it's like, wow, today sucks. Like, then it's like, like it's okay to be vulnerable and say it today. And like to even just to piggyback of what Brittany said about questions, there's been times where, like I feel like me and others close to us, like we've had these conversations of like, oh, I'm stressed because of this thing and I don't know how to do it. And then we'll motivate each other to be like, okay, well, let's just figure it out together. By asking questions. And it's so funny that Brittany had said that, because it's something I was even told recently, because I usually ask questions, but then I don't know, given pandemic and all that stuff, we're all in our heads. Yeah. So, I'm just trying to figure things out. And recently I was like, I need to ask some questions. And, it's like putting ego aside. Like we don't know it all. We all don't know it all. And yeah, there's no problem with asking questions. So yeah, for me, it's definitely just keeping that tribe around me. And like, and if I'm on something, one of them pull it out, and I'm like, and being receptive and accountable too. Yeah. To even when somebody gives me some feedback that I might not like, but I'm like, I know you're saying this because you care and because I can do better. Yeah. So rather than being defensive, I've learned to more so be willing to understand and listen, digest it, and then okay, versus being reactive.
Listen, Ashley, thank you for that TED Talk. Being accountable. I think it was absolutely beautiful. And I just felt my life changing as I was listening to it.
Oh my God.
Femme, what about you? How do you keep yourself grounded in this industry?
I have 5 siblings.
Oh, okay.
Brothers. So they definitely keep me in place and in check. So my family. But I also think, making sure you identify what your purpose is, your career, whatever it may be. I think that's what really helps me stay grounded, is genuinely knowing what my purpose is and always have that in the back of my mind. Kind of keeps you on track, especially during the hard times or challenging times when you feel like, are you doing the right thing? So purpose for sure, and family.
Yes, thank you both for sharing this. We have about 5 minutes left. I'm going to try to get through some of our questions from our audience. So I'll ask this question to Alexia. How does working in brand partnerships affect how you brand yourselves personally and your personal brand on social media?
There's definitely some impact there. I feel like the moment you asked me that question, what popped into my head was that Netflix documentary, that Social Dilemma. And once you have, it's almost not necessarily a burden, but the burden of knowledge, like once you know how things work on the back end, you do move differently and you pay attention more so to what you consume, and you ask yourself questions like, did I buy this because of what I saw, or am I buying it because I actually like it? Yeah. I've definitely been moved in that sense. I'm always, when I watch TV or I'm watching a program and I'm looking at the ads, I always have something to say about it, like whether I like it or not. So it's definitely affected how I digest media and content. I'm always like, well, what are they trying to say there? What? And honestly, I wish I could turn it off. I wish I could, but it serves a great purpose. Like when I'm at work sometimes and we're brainstorming and I'm like, wait a minute, I saw a brand do this, or I saw them do this different style ad online or on linear. So it definitely affects how I digest content. Even how I look at artists and I see like Easter eggs. I see sometimes record labels will try to plant certain brands early on, like within their music visuals and things like that. I feel like I'm just I'm a lot more opinionated about that stuff than I was beforehand. But it's good. I think it's healthy. I think getting your mind, like having your mind turn wheels like that and ask questions that aren't necessarily in the forefront, or you're looking for certain things, I think it just keeps you sharp. So it's definitely been impactful in that way.
Brittany, what resources, a question from Jewel, what resources, websites, networks, or tools are you currently using to stay educated on the latest trends?
Wow. Okay, well, YouTube is a tool you could use to stay up on the latest trends. Yeah. Even when I used to work at Spotify, I used to be on YouTube to see what was kind of bubbling up in the underbelly of YouTube that has, 2 billion users every day. So that's probably the biggest tool that I use. And then I'm also a part of a few like industry newsletters that kind of flag different trends, whether it's different financial deals with certain organizations or businesses, or different acquisitions. So that's kind of how I kind of keep up on the business side. And then like, honestly, right now I've been on this app called Clubhouse, and I've been trying to immerse myself in all of the non-music industry rooms and trying to learn things from different VCs, different like political analysts, just hearing across the board and kind of figuring out how that can intersection with what I do on a day-to-day basis, to also figure out like what are they working on, where they have their eyes on. So diving into a few different industries that way. So
it's interesting. Brittany, were you talking about sort of having this, being able to know what trends are happening in different spaces, whether it's in the industry or out of the industry? And Faith, I'm curious to know, is there sort of, what is the PG-13 way of saying this? Is there a sort of barometer in terms of, or like, this is working, let's do it, versus like, how do you know something's working versus hearing it on YouTube and you saw one video and like, okay, cool, let's do it? Or is it you need enough people to say, let's actually explain this? None of that made any sense, but I hope that you got something from it.
I don't know. I think I got it. I think it goes back to kind of understanding. I think especially when you are working in music and brand partnerships, and you see the connections between an artist or an influencer and the partnership, and you're researching the different partnerships that are successful, you're able to pull, the learnings from it, what worked, what didn't work, kind of. And I also think what's great though too is that I'm a part of a team who they're creatives themselves, and they're kind of trailblazers in a sense of they know who's hot, they know who's going to be the next, whoever it is.
Yeah.
And lucky for me, I can kind of go to them, ask for their expertise. You don't always have to, be the expert of everything. So I will, sometimes it's great because they'll just be like, that's not going to work.
Yeah.
And that's it, because it's not cool, or it's, it's not creative enough. So I just, leaning in on who's around you to kind of ask and learn.
Well, the time has come where we have to close our session. And I want to close it by just asking you all one final question. I want you all to take yourselves back to who you were, whether it be in high school or in college, and just one thing that you wish, that one thing that you know now that you wish you had known then. I know, I love all the deep breaths on the call. Actually, I love how you're just looking at like. Okay, Alexia.
I will say the one thing that I wish I knew, that I definitely know now, is that everyone is figuring it out in real time. There's no one who knows everything that they're supposed to do and the perfect way to do it. You always find something out along the way, and you end up changing or adjusting, but don't get discouraged by feeling like you don't know what to do, or you don't know what that role entails, or honestly, everyone's figuring it out. And I feel like if you go into it with that mindset, you won't be afraid to ask questions. You won't be afraid to put yourself out there. You won't be afraid to suggest things, and you'll take criticism and you'll take feedback a lot more positively. But yeah, no one has it figured out.
I think Alexia probably just spoke for all of us.
Yeah, I was like, that's definitely.
That's why I wanted to say, I didn't want you guys to steal that one. So I was like, I'll go first.
It's like I would add to that with also just what I definitely know now, and like something that, especially when it comes to my artists, that I have no problem doing, is asking for what we're worth, the value, and not being afraid that like, oh, am I shooting too high? Because you might as well shoot high and then negotiate, then go too low. Like, it's something that old me was always like, I'm afraid to ask, for money, to do something. But it's like, I'm actually bringing a lot to the table, and now like putting it where I'm at now, like with like artists, like my artist is doing XYZ. So we need this much and this is why. And if you need a proposal, I will be glad to send you.
Brought up.
Yeah, don't sell yourself short, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's an exercise, right? I think all of this is like a learning experience. Like Alexia said, you don't always have the answers. And then sometimes and I think the beauty of it all is that we all have made these mistakes and stumbled along the way. And I think it just makes you a stronger person in the industry, because it's not for the faint of heart. And so sometimes if, this advice I think could alleviate you from some of the pain points that we have gone through, but also too, I think without some of these hurdles, you won't get the fighters that you have in this industry.
Right.
So.
Yeah. And Faye, last but not least, close us out.
Be confident. Have some confidence, especially in our industry. It's a little wild, but be confident in yourself as you're growing up, and you're your biggest cheerleader. So.
Thank you all so much for joining our Music for Industry session today. Give yourselves a round of applause.